welcome to a very special episode of the Heartland Author Podcast. I'm Aaron Apollo Camp. For the first time in a long time, I'm going to interview a guest of this podcast. Today's guest is D. Neil Elliott, the author of A Higher Road, Cleanse Your Consciousness to Transcend the Ego and Ascend Spirituality. I'm here with D. Neil Elliott, who is the author of a book. Neil, could you give me the title of your book?
Absolutely. It's called A Higher Road, Cleanse Your Consciousness to Transcend the Ego and Ascend Spiritually.
Okay, for short, we'll refer to it as A Higher Road for the rest of this interview.
Absolutely, and that's you can do a search on that and you can find it that way.
Okay, my first question is a very simple one. Tell our listeners a few things about yourself.
Oh, absolutely. So born in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I've lived in Canada my entire life. I've lived across Canada, Toronto being one. Currently 61 years old, married. I have three children, and I have 5 grandchildren, and all my grandchildren are in Texas. I'm a professional engineer with an MBA, and I've worked in the hydroelectric industry for over 30 years, managing small projects, large projects, a few $100,000 to $100 million. And that's kind of a little bit about me.
That is very interesting. Now, my next question is, without spoiling too much of the book, describe your book in no more than several sentences.
Okay, well, my book is about my spiritual journey. And the impetus for that journey was my consciousness over time, and I explain this in the book, brought me to the brink of suicide. And I had come across some information about, this is a short story, came across some information about a week prior. I sat down to craft my suicide note, and I thought that with this new information I got, it promised to liberate me from my current thinking. And so being an engineer, I said, okay, I'm going to study this material. If it works, great. If it doesn't, I can always commit suicide. And so my book is really, the first part's my memoir, which describes exactly how I created my every tomorrows and brought me to this brink of suicide. The next part of my book is about some scientific learnings that meld then and transition over to my spiritual journey, which had a spiritual awakening. And then the last bit of my book is the experience as I went through the 7 steps that I offer people to consider to have the same spiritual journey if they're interested.
The only part of your book that I've seen so far is the front cover and the back blurb, and I believe the back blurb is posted on your website, dneilelliott.com, if I recall correctly.
Yes, there's so on my website there is quite a bit of information about the book and various facets of my experience. And the book is available on Amazon in ebook or paperback, and available in local bookstores, and soon a hardcover will be coming out. But I issued it first in a trade paperback and an ebook. A bit more information on the website, and anybody interested in learning more can go there, and you can actually request the first chapter as a freebie just to see whether it's something that you like.
Okay, that is very important information. Now, I briefly mentioned the front cover of your book, and it features what looks like a temperate rainforest. Did you take the photo that is featured on the front cover of your book?
No, I didn't. And part of this whole writing process is it's very interesting. So what I did is I had a vision for what that front cover I wanted that front cover to look like. And then what I did was I did some searches and I found a couple of or a variety of photos that were had elements of what I liked. And then we'll talk more about this. But the team I hired to help me created graphic design, did that front cover for me by utilizing a couple of the photos that I sent them, and then I requested some tweaks to that. So
Yeah, I asked that because you live close by to some temperate rainforests that exist on the British Columbia coast and up into Alaska.
absolutely, and if I could have found the right I lived in a pretty remote part, and I never thought to take a photo of the paths, etc., that I was on. So I couldn't find anything in my library of 15,000 photos that had exactly what I was looking for. But these photos are taken in this northwestern part of the Canada and U.S.
Now, is your book self published or traditionally published? And I ask this because the publisher that was listed on the Amazon page for your book is a publisher that I've never heard of.
So that's self-published, and I'm the publisher, and yeah, and I have the publishing company that did that.
Oh, it's like a small press.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that you were on the brink of suicide before you went through this journey that you described in this book. I'll talk a little bit about because almost 2 years ago I had repeated suicidal thoughts myself, and my journey out of having suicidal thoughts involved and this is a very American thing given how our health insurance system is set up. I had to work out some issues with a private health insurer so I could get a primary care doctor that would prescribe me an antidepressant that I take, and I've not had suicidal thoughts since starting my antidepressant, although I had some brain fog that was a side effect of the antidepressant I take, which is an SSRI type antidepressant called citalopram, and that brain fog has just started to clear up for me in the last few weeks.
I'm glad to hear that your brain fog is clearing up. That's fantastic. Did you have a question in that,
Okay,
or?
the next question here is one of the people who has praised your book is a man by the name of Dr. Michael Ireland. Could you tell our listeners a couple of things about him? Because he wrote a very favorable praise of your book that is featured on your website.
Yeah, and before I answer that, I just want to. Sorry, I thought you had a question associated with that. I'm glad that you found something that worked for you because
Yes.
that's really important. Anybody that is having suicidal thoughts. I mean, for me, and this might have been similar to you. I over time, experienced just a deeper and deeper depression, and just felt I had no way out.
Yeah, I was that way as well because there was a lot going on in my life in early 2020. My dad died very suddenly from sudden heart failure, and
I'm
my mother had been in ill health, but she's recovered very well.
Well, I'm sorry
So
for your loss with your dad. I'm sorry for your loss.
that's thank you.
So I'm glad your mom has recovered.
Yeah.
So my so yeah, back. I'm sorry, I got off track and I forgot your question.
Oh yeah. Yeah, one of the people that praised your book is a man by the name of Dr. Michael Ireland. And could you tell our listeners a couple of things about him? Because he wrote a very uh, praiseworthy statement about your book on your that's featured on your website.
Yeah, so Dr. Michael Ireland is actually a woman, and
Oh, it's a woman. I'm
so it.
sorry
Yeah,
about
no, no,
that.
no. I had the same. I had the same. Not a in my world. I'm not saying it isn't, but in my world, Michael was not a common name for a female. But no, she is a female, and she is not a medical doctor. She has a PhD, and her
Okay, so she's a doctor of
PhD.
psychology.
Yeah, she's more of a she's got a doctorate either in English and or in religious studies, that area. So she's very well versed in terms of languages and various things, but not a medical doctor.
Okay. Now, Dr. Ireland, she referenced a document that changed your life in her praise of the book. If this would not spoil too much of the book, what is that document?
Okay, well, let's talk about the book a little bit more so I can
Okay.
describe this whole thing for you. So first off, so the my impetus for sharing this is I found this information and it promised to liberate me from my thinking
Okay.
and the situation I was in. And because of the situation I was in, I was in financial distress, and I felt all I was doing was work, 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 and not getting ahead. And everything seemed to kind of be going wrong. I had this deep depression. And so for me, I had this little bit of Christian teaching when I was younger. And I had this little bit of doubt of committing suicide's not a good thing. I could go to hell if I do that. I'm not religious. I'm more agnostic before this whole thing here. So, but I felt that I'd be taking a chance. Engineers always, if you look at risk, right? So I'm looking at, okay, well, if there's no way out. I'm miserable. I just can't carry on. If I commit suicide, my life insurance will kind of alleviate the financial pressure for my wife, and she would be okay. So she went off to visit. Our house finally sold after 7 years. That cleared that debt. She went off to visit her family in Toronto, her brother, etc., in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I sat down and crafted this suicide note. I'd come across this document, and the document promised to liberate me from my thoughts if I read it and studied it. And I read a little bit, and I thought, okay, there might be something here. And so I put a plan in place, and I said, I'm going to study this, and if it doesn't work, I can always commit suicide. So I put my suicide note aside. I hid it. I haven't shared it with anybody. Um, and I started this process. And part of this process is it's very scientifically based. We know today, for example, that there's nothing solid in the universe. We think there's all kinds of things solid around us, but at a subatomic level, everything is really just energy, made up of energy. And this document took me through a scientific based process matched with kind of new age spiritual learnings and understandings, and taught me things that I just did not have any concept of. And as I went through this process, and it took about a year, uh, the the changes in me were slow and imperceptible. But what happened a year after, almost to the day, a year after, I woke up and I went, my depression's totally gone. I'm full of joy. I'm full of love. I'm happy to be alive. I know why people do the things they do. And I want to share this information with the world because I think it would be so helpful for people to actually understand it, be exposed to it, and make a decision for themselves whether this would be useful. So I wanted to shout this from the rooftops, but I thought, I'm going to be looked at like some kind of nutcase and they should lock me up. So it took me a couple of years to figure out how do I share this. And then I decided the best way is to write my experience and put that into a book and offer people the 7 steps that I followed for them to consider for themselves whether this could be helpful to them. And you and I both know, and I think all of your listeners know, regardless of how much money you have, regardless of how many houses you own and how many cars you have, we know from either friends with people that are like that, or perhaps we're like that ourselves, or we see it in the news. Regardless of your material wealth, there are people that commit suicide, they get into drugs, they, drink, become alcoholics. The misery that we experience has nothing to do with what we own or how many material things we have. It is an consciousness that we have and we've adopted since childhood, and we have reinforced that creates these issues. And so my book is about, the first part of my book, I recommend everybody read it from cover to cover, understand the process in its entirety, and then make a decision for themselves. So the first part is my memoir, and it's in there only as an illustration tomorrows and got me to this brink of suicide. The next part of my book introduces people to scientific learnings from other authors and researched material about things that we know today that we didn't know 100 years, 200, 300 years ago. And I take you through a process that takes you then to step 1 in this process. And the goal is to kind of open your mind so you are receptive to of this new information that I'm going to share. And some of it might not be new to some people, but it will be new to a lot of people. And you need to be receptive to this information to actually absorb it and understand it. So I take you to step 1, which is a near-death experience by another author. And that she describes very clearly a new concept of consciousness, one that I had never understood before. But she describes in her experience of this near death what she experienced around, kind of the afterlife, so to speak. And she had suffered from aggressive cancer, and after 4 years, she was rushed to the hospital. She weighed 75 pounds. She was on a respirator, and she was in a coma. And the doctors told her husband that she wouldn't make it through the night. She was riddled with cancer throughout her whole body and her lymphatic system. She woke up 24 hours later and declared she was going to be okay. And within 2 weeks, the medical team could not find a trace of cancer in her body. And that was, 14, 16 years ago. And so it's quite a story. So that's kind of the first thing is step 1. Then I move into this new material, this blueprint document material, which I have gathered together and I offer to people after they've read the book. And it's free. It'll be a free PDF download. And I introduce you to this material, and you need to come to it as a small child, a curious child, one full of wonder and joy, and with no prejudgments. And if you can do that, and you can open yourself up to learning this material, and if you go through the process and you follow these steps, you too in a year from now may experience what I've experienced. And you get a total shift in your consciousness. The last part of my chapter is my experience as I went through this journey, and the outcome of that that I offer to you. So it's this 7-step process to do that. So this blueprint document, I don't share the title of it. Information I used, free. And the reason I'm doing that is because if I was to just give you the title of that, many people would go to it and they would reject it based on how it's been marketed. And what you need to do is just get beyond that. And so my book is a process to open people up to actually take a chance to come to it like a small child, learn it, understand it if they're interested, and then follow the process I did. And it's a spiritual document, but based in science. And it merges current scientific understandings and learnings with spirituality. And I tell you, you will understand spirituality and you'll understand why we're here and why we come back lifetime after lifetime to experience what we do. We are an earth. Our earth is our school. And there's a plan and a reason for why we do that. You'll understand all of that if you follow the process I followed. And if you read my book cover to cover, you'll have an idea of whether it's something that looks interesting to you. Did that answer your question?
That answered my question. I will tell you that you are most definitely not a nutcase at all. I would never say that about you. And that story about the author that was on her deathbed, basically, and miraculously survived cancer was very fascinating.
It's a fascinating story, and so in my book, what I do is I'm a big believer in not summarizing other people's work. So if I take one of these scientific books that describes how our thinking and feeling affects our cells, if I describe that to you, I could very well misinterpret or give you the wrong information. So I'm a big believer in, I give you a little synopsis of that book, recommend you read it, for example, and it's up to you whether you read it or not. But if you read that author firsthand, you will get your interpretation and your understanding directly from them. And I think that is the best way for people to learn rather than having a summary by others. So the book with the near-death experience, I highly recommend that people read that book as well. But I describe why it's part of this process in my book, kind of this synopsis of this story. But really, to get the full understanding, you need to read her original work.
And also, before I continue with the interview, I'm going to make a couple notes of apologies. If you heard a tone in the background on my end, that was the clothes dryer, because I'm doing laundry while doing this interview, and that was the tone for the dryer being done. And also, if a Dr. Ireland is by some chance listening to this podcast, I sincerely apologize for misgendering her. Here in the United States, Michael, maybe it's not totally unheard of for that to be the name for a woman, but the feminine form of Michael that would be expected here in the States would be something like Michelle. Michael being the masculine form.
Yes. I can't comment one way or the other. This was the first woman I had met with the name of Michael. I think it's pretty cool. So it's like another name I've just heard the other day for a woman is Charlie, and I'm going, I love that name. That's a great name for a woman, Charlie.
My mom went to school. This was back in the the 1950s, 1960s in Western Indiana. Went to school with a girl whose first name was Richard.
Oh.
True story.
Okay. Well, hey, there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, it's cool.
Nothing wrong with that. My first name, Aaron, is masculine, although it's pronounced almost identically to Erin, which is a common female name here in the States. Aaron, which is how my first name is spelled, is typically a masculine name, although they have two different origins of names. Aaron has a biblical, Aaron has a biblical origin. Erin is a poetic name for Ireland.
Ah, okay. Good to know. Good to know.
Uh, Another question I have is you use variations of the word spirit, such as spirituality, quite often on your website and earlier on in this interview, as a matter of fact, to describe your book. And spirituality is a concept that exists in Christianity and in a lot of other different religions. Do you believe that your book offers helpful advice to people of differing religious beliefs?
Oh, absolutely. This book transcends all religions throughout the world.
Yeah, I asked that because
Uh,
Karen
so
Farmer, who's a fellow podcast host, praised your book by stating that it offered helpful advice regardless of the reader's religious beliefs. That's why I asked that.
yes, yeah, no, absolutely, and yes, you're right. Karen has written a very nice review. She was a great podcast host, and she and I had an interview, so I was on her show as well, and she has read my book. She waited till she read the whole thing before she provided a review.
Okay, now I only have a couple of more questions here. Are you currently writing or planning to write more books?
Yes, I have another one in mind, but right now my focus is on getting this one out and getting traction in the marketplace. And quite frankly, a metric that we all use is how many sales to indicate how many readers we have. And what I ask people to do with my book, of course I would like sales because that's going to give me that metric of I'm reaching people around the world in various um, locations. Uh, but if you purchase a print copy of my book and you've read it, and whether you like it or whether it's for you or it's not for you, I ask you at the end of when you've read it, especially if you go, this isn't for me, if you just pass it on to somebody else and without any colorful commentary other than perhaps, hey, you might find this interesting or this might be useful to you, um, without any other colorful commentary, and let them discover for themselves whether this can help them. Because you can never truly judge the inner reality of another person. We all are actors. We all put on a face to the world. We can all, um, kind of, you know, put our best foot forward in situations. And so, really, what's going on inside somebody, you cannot judge one way or the other. And the only way to actually understand people is to really understand their story and really make a deep connection with them. And there's not a lot of people that we do that with in a really deep way where the person feels like they're going to share what they're really feeling. And I can tell you, for me, for example, being a professional engineer, MBA, and a consultant, I'm good at just covering everything up. And I didn't even share with my family what was really going on for me internally. So no one knew. And if I ended up committing suicide, I would have caused all kinds of pain and misery to a bunch of people that, wasn't even on my radar at the time because I was just so miserable and so depressed. And so even though every work colleague and everybody in my family would go, this person's okay, they're doing well. On the outside, I'd look great, right? Just I was doing well financially from their perspective. I was functioning well. I was, still meeting all my clients' needs, but I was miserable inside. And so no one can judge that. So I ask people once they've read my book, if they're done with it and decide that it's for them or not for them, but when they're finished my book, if it's a print copy, please pass it on to somebody else. My goal is that this book is read, if I could, read by everybody in the world. Of course, I don't have any control of that, but I'd like as many people as possible to read this book and let them discover for themselves whether this process can help them. That was a long-winded answer.
I understand. The final question I have for this interview is, what books other than your own or mine do you enjoy reading?
Oh, that's a great question. I've read a lot of other kind of spiritual type books, especially as part of this process. I like kind of this mix of science and spirituality, but Wade Dyer is a favorite author that I've read pretty much every one of his books. I liked by James Comey, A Higher Loyalty. That was a great book.
James Comey, who was the former FBI director here in the United States for a number of years.
Yeah, that's the one. That was a great book, and I listened to it as an audio, and he's got a great narration voice as well. And a real old classic I love is A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. That's a great book. And I've read some other near-death experiences recently, just to get a flavor of the different experiences that those people have read. And Proof of Heaven by Evan Alexander, To Heaven and Back by Mary C. Neal, and 7 Lessons from Heaven by Mary C. Neal as well. So those were good reads as well.
Okay. Thank you for appearing on this podcast, and I enjoyed being able to interview you today.
Having a conversation with you, and I thank you so much for being able to have this conversation with you.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed listening to today's interview, and one more time, I thank Mr. Elliott for his participation in this interview. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at authoraac.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter at authoraac. You can also watch videos on the Heartland Author channel on YouTube. Copyright 2021, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of its audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.